Good evening. Welcome back to the study of Daniel. We are going to be in the 8th chapter tonight. So if you would like to get your Bibles, you got a little bit of time here and turn to that 8th chapter. This is actually session number 22, and we're going to be looking at this ram and this goat in this vision and dream that Daniel is going to have tonight. If you will recall, back when we were looking at chapter 5, there was this banquet that King Belshazzar was having. And there was this writing that happened on the wall, and Daniel came and interpreted it for him and actually told him that night told him that the kingdom was going to fall and that the kingdom that was going to take it over was going to be the Medes and the Persians. And so one of the questions that comes up is how did Daniel know about the Medes and the Persians? Well, it goes back here to this chapter, here in chapter 8, in this vision. We talked about how Daniel was going to have 4 dreams over the course of about 22 years. We've seen the first 2 dreams. We had his dream with the interpretation that he gave to Nebuchadnezzar. All right. Then we see the dream that he had of the 4 beasts, which was in chapter 7. And now we're seeing this dream that he is having in chapter 8. And this dream, once again, is going to be very disturbing to him. But within this dream, and this is another one of these chapters that actually is out of place chronologically. It goes all the way back and goes before chapter 5, just as chapter 7 did as well. And so in this dream, he is going to get this dream of a ram and a goat. And it's actually the Medes and the Persians that he is going to be told. And so this is how he knows. So if we think about chapter 5, Daniel was probably in his 80s. In chapter 8, he's probably around, being somewhere around 70 or so. And it is going to talk about how the Medes and the Persians were going to come to power. So what I want to do, though, is I want to kind of go out of order here a little bit, because we can see that there's a 10-year gap. And so I want to kind of explain that, but in order for us to do that, we need to jump all the way down to verse 26. And I want to go down there first. It's going to take me just a second to scroll down to get to verse 26. And I think this will kind of help us in understanding what's going on here. So let me read verse 26 for you. It says, "And the vision of the evenings and the mornings, which was told, is true." Okay, so this is talking about this dream that he's going to have here in 8. And an angel's telling him, "Therefore seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future." Okay, and 27 said this, and I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for days afterwards. I arose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the visions, but no one understood it. Okay, so I hope I can make it clear here. What has happened is Daniel is actually told about the fall of the Babylonian Empire basically 10 years prior to this actually occurring. Okay, and it tells him to seal it up. Now, it's not that he's keeping it away from everybody, but it's a dream that would be spoken of later in time. And so this was a burden that he was going to carry. Remember, he was friends with so many of these. I know in one of the books that I was reading, it says, think about if you were given some sort of dream or vision about the final days of the United States, and that you knew that bad things were going to occur maybe 3 or 4 years from now, and you were told to kind of sit on that and not really tell anybody of that it would be for future use. Think about that anxiety that you may have about knowing that maybe friends or family or whatever would be affected by this. And so when we see here in verse 27, Daniel speaking of being sick, he was very burdened by this knowledge that he was given by God about the future events. And that's what it tells us actually here in verse 26. It says, for it refers to many days in the future. So we are seeing him speaking of this as going to be future events. And it's not so, like I said, it's not so much that he was keeping it secret. He was just informed of future, and that it was going to be used to inform generations to come. So, and it also goes on to tell us that knowing this was in 27. I thought this was very interesting. It said, I arose and went about the king's business. So after he had this dream, guess what? He just kept doing the work that he had, and doing it as not as if anything hadn't happened, but he was continuing doing the things that he was supposed to have done. So as we look at this book of Daniel, just remember this, that the first 6 chapters of Daniel, we see God is very, very focused on the Gentiles. And it speaks of kingdoms that are rising and falling, and it's God's plan. And it's very apart from Israel. Israel is not really here in the picture that much at all. But then as we get into basically chapter 7 and then moving here into 8, we see God once again making a shift from focusing on the Gentiles to focusing more on Israel, or the Jews. Even to the point in which, if you remember us speaking earlier, that the first 6 chapters of Daniel or really 7 chapters of Daniel was written in Aramaic, which was the language of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians of the time. Now we're seeing it shift back to Hebrew. Okay, so it's going to be moving back into the Hebrew language, which was that of Israel and the Jews. And so God is starting to move his focus from the time of the Gentile. We're going to be looking at these weeks in sessions to come, to now this time of the Jew. And so God is showing us this path that he has chosen for his people. And it's very specific. Everything that we're going to read about is so specific. And I know we've touched on that time and time again about prophecy having to be exact, not just similar, but exact. And so Israel, once again, is going to be the center of the world. It's just like when, Jesus came. Jesus came, and basically most of his work was done around Jerusalem. We know that Jerusalem is the city of David. It is his chosen. We know that's where the millennial kingdom is going to be at. The ruling and the basically the capital is going to be Jerusalem. It is his city. It's Jesus' city. But for so long, it has really been a city of wrath, a place of judgment, a place of just some very catastrophic events, and really because of the lack of commitment that the Israelites showed towards God. And so they had to go through some time of adjustment, I guess you would say. But now we're going to see, God he's always guaranteed that there's going to be a remnant, that remnant being a Jewish remnant. And now this shift is starting to go towards the Jews. And so we realize that right now there's still a lot of unrest and conflict. And what we see in Jerusalem right now is we see a collision of 2 kingdoms. That these kingdoms collide. Now, what are they? Well, we have the human kingdom, the seen kingdom, and then we have the spiritual realm, or the unseen. And we see that battle fighting right now. And what we see is for so many years, Israel has just barely hung in there, surviving as a people. Now what we see is that the fig tree is fruiting, and the land is turning green. The land is being very bountiful. The technology and the industry and innovation that's coming out of Israel is just second to none. But there's also conflict there as well. And they have all these different enemies coming at them. And we've spoken of that, what's going on in Syria, which is just north of them, and all the issues that are happening in Iran. I wish I could go into what's happened really over the last 10 days in Iran, but I don't think right now is the right time to do that. But there's a lot going on over there. And there's battles that are raging, but because of what is going on in this country, we don't even, it's not reported on what is going on in the Middle East. But like we said, that the Middle East should be our focus, and I would encourage you to go to, some of the people over there, some of the sources over there. And one of them I always talk about is Behold Israel. I think that's probably the best one, but also the Jerusalem Post is one in which you can get some information. It's a newspaper, but you can still get some information. But Behold Israel is a great one to go to understand. So like I said, this chapter is going to be written before chapter 5. So it was written, like I said, around probably 551 BC. And like we said, Daniel was about 70 years old. And it was 10 years prior to the fall of Babylon. And I can't stress that enough, how important that is, because that means that Daniel kind of sat on that information for that long. And it was a burden that he had to carry until that day in which he had he was called into the service of Belshazzar. Remember, he was not a part of Belshazzar's court at that time. And when Belshazzar kind of took over, he got rid of so many of them. And so Daniel was just doing whatever work he was doing. So now let's go back up. Let's go back up to the very first part of the chapter, and we will jump back. So I kind of gave you an idea about what happened in the latter verses. Also, what I'm going to be bouncing back and forth, because the first part of this chapter is actually going to be the dream. And I'm going to actually, I'm going to interpret it. The dream is interpreted later in, I think it starts around verse 20. And so I'm going to be kind of giving you some interpretations and stuff as we go along. So there may be some redundancy here, but just kind of bear with me, because I want you to kind of understand. I don't want you to get lost in a lot of the symbolism without understanding the impact that it's having. So let's look at verse 1, and this is going to kind of date it for us, and I've already done that, but let's look at verse 1. It says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time." So when was the first time? It was during the 1st year of the reign of Belshazzar. So that was basically 2 years prior to this one. And that was the 2nd dream. This is the 3rd dream that is occurring. And it actually goes, and it was to me, if you can believe it, to Daniel, it appeared to me. So this is Daniel's 3rd dream. So let's look at verse 2. It says this: "I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, or Susa, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision that I was by the river Uli, or Uli, I believe, Uli." So what I want to do here is I want to talk about this verse 2. Now, Daniel's in Susa. All right, now, why is that important? It's important because that is actually going to be the capital of the Medo-Persian Empire, or really the Persians. And at this point in time in which he was given this vision, Susa was really just a small, I don't want to say village, but it was a very small city. I know one writer said it didn't even require a big red dot on the map. It was very small. But now all of a sudden he is transported to this place. He is also by the canal Uli. Now, I will tell you this. I'm going to show you a few maps of Elam first. Elam is southeast of Babylon. And this is really where the Persians came out of. Remember, the Medes were more north. But the Persians kind of come out of Elam. I'm actually going to show you a few pictures of Susa. You also hear it called Shushan, Susa, S-U-S-A. And I'm going to show you just some of the remnants of that, just so you can kind of get an idea. But just realize that it was basically the capital of the Medo-Persian Empire once it gets going. So Daniel's being given this way before Susha is really becomes a player within the kingdom. Right now, they're just subservient to the Babylonians. Now, the problem is with where it says Uli, the canal of Uli, there are several different waterways that come in right around Susha. And so there's debate, as always, of which one was actually Uli. It really does not matter whatsoever. Just know that there was these rivers of this canal that he envisioned, and he was standing beside one as he got this message. So I just don't want us to get all caught up in this. And this is not, I try to give you as much information as I possibly can so it paints a better picture for you. I know some people don't like history or geography or anything like that, but to me, it just brings out and makes it more real if I can get a visual. And so that's why I try to push that to you. So here's Daniel standing, and he's getting this vision. It says, this is verse 3. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. Now, I want you to see how precise this prophecy is. All right, so first of all, now like I said, this is going to be interpreted, I believe, in verse 20. Okay, so if you want to jump down, we're going to get to verse 20 probably the next time, but I want to go ahead and give you some of the information just so you understand what we're talking about. So going back to verse 3, it says, I lifted my eyes and I saw there standing beside the river was a ram with 2 horns. Now, all right, so we had 2 horns of a ram, we had 2 arms of a statue that was silver. Okay, this is the Medes and Persian Empire. It actually speaks of that specifically in verse 20. All right, then it tells us that there was 2 horns and one was raised higher. Now, the one that was raised higher signifies that it was stronger. Okay, but watch this. But it said it came up what? Last. All right, and that's exactly how the Medes and the Persians. Initially, the Medes were stronger and the Persians were lesser. And then over time, the Persians became the power and they became the power, and the Medes basically become subservient to them. So here we are, we have this ram that is speaking of the Medo-Persian Empire, and it's actually speaking of one being stronger than the other, and we know that to be the case when we look at that empire. All right, so let's look down at verse 4. It says this. It says, I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. All right, that's exactly what the Medo-Persian Empire did. Whenever it really came into power after it captured Babylon, it started once again in conquering, and we know that. We know that it pushed out to the north, and it also pushed to the south in all directions. And because it had a thirst, it was imperialistic. The one thing that it wanted to be is it wanted to rule the world. And so once again, it speaks of this. Remember the 3 ribs? Well, it gives us 3 directions once again that it was pushing out. And so, we know from some of the other chapters of the bear that had the 3 ribs in its mouth. And the 3 was Lydia, which was to the north. We had Babylon. Which was westward of it. And then we had what? We had Egypt, that was southward. So once again, very specific in the description of what was happening here in this vision. And we know that it was very quick and that it was bloodthirsty in the way in which it conquered. Then we look at verse 5, and it says, and as I was considering, okay, so he was seeing this vision and he was considering this vision, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Okay, so we have this goat that comes. This goat is actually the Greeks. This is actually spoken of in verse 21 now. So in the ancients, there is a story of an oracle or a mystic that sends out this goat, and this goat goes out looking for new land and pretty much takes up residence in this place called Aegea. And we've probably heard of the Aegean Sea. Well, the Aegean Sea actually means the Goat Sea. And so here, once again, we just see kind of how history and prophecy come together. Just another way in which we connect Greece to a goat. Now, we don't need any of that because we can look at verse 21 and we see that in verse 21 that Gabriel's the one who is actually going to interpret this dream for Daniel, tells us that it's the Greeks. But I just think it's always cool. We just see so many different layers and how they just support each other. And then as we look on down into verse 5, it says that across the surface of the whole earth without touching, that this goat came from the west, and that's where Greece was at. It came from the west, and it was moving so fast that it wasn't even touching the ground, and that the goat had a notable horn on it. Now, this horn is Alexander the Great, okay? And we know that that the Greeks pretty much conquered the entire known world in about 12 years. And so by it not touching the ground, it symbolizes how fast. Remember, we talked about the techniques that they used, which was blitzkrieg, which is fast moving. All right. Also, as we think about it, and we look at history, Alexander the Great basically had three major battles against the Medo-Persian Empire, and in most cases they were extremely outnumbered. That's why he was considered such a great military mind, is because he outmaneuvered people. He used this technique called blitzkrieg. He had a final battle. I believe it's called Gaugamela. Gaugamela was a battle in which it was the Medes and the Persians were pretty much destroyed. Darius was chased off. I think the battle before, a lot of Darius's family had been captured. Darius was asking for them to be given back. They were not given back. But Alexander the Great respected him as a military leader, was chasing him. Actually, some of Darius's people had him murdered. When Alexander found out about this, he was infuriated. When he finally overcame them, maybe nearly a year later, he had all of those mutineers executed. He actually gave Darius a royal wedding. That's just how much he respected him. And this battle happened kind of in, I believe it would be northwestern Iraq, but it was one in which they were extremely outnumbered. And, like I said, estimates are anywhere from, 35,000 or so Greeks to upwards of 300,000 or 400,000 Medes and Persians. So this was a very substantial battle, and that was pretty much the end of the Medo-Persian Empire. Let's look at 7. It says, "And I saw him confronting the ram." So the goat was confronting the ram, and he was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his two horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him. But he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hands. So verse 7 actually speaks of these battles in which the ram lost to the goat, and the goat destroyed him. And so I think probably the last verse we're going to look at tonight is this one. "Therefore the male goat grew very great." All right, we know that happened with the Greeks. "But when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in its place of its four notable ones came up towards the four winds of heaven." Remember, we talked about Alexander and how he died at a very, very young age, and his kingdom was going to be divided, or was divided by four different generals, basically. Now, if you go back and look at the top of 8, verse 8, it actually tells us that it grew very strong. A couple of things that happened with Alexander. First of all, Alexander really started building roads to connect all of his provinces together so people can move faster. Isn't it kind of strange that he was building these roads, and these roads that he built were actually roads that helped the disciples as they moved around spreading the word. He also wanted everybody that he conquered to speak Greek. And so we hear this Hellenistic cultural shift that goes on. And basically what he was doing, when you hear about Hellenism, it's just basically all the Greek culture. And so he was wanting everybody to learn Greek. And we know that so much of the Bible, the New Testament, is written in Greek. And we can thank Alexander. He didn't know he was doing the work of God, but we know that God is always using people to fulfill his plan. It's not his own plan. Alexander obviously was very egotistical in so many ways. He knew he thought how great he was, and that the reason he was so great was because of who he was. He believed that he was descended of Zeus and Achilles, and he was actually, I don't know if you know this, but Alexander was actually taught by Aristotle. Aristotle was one of his teachers that he taught him with philosophy. So here was somebody who was very well learned, but in actuality, what he was is he was implanted by God to do the work that God needed him to do, to set the world up for the plan that God had to play out. So anyhow, I hope this has made sense to you. I know I've had a ball digging into it. And next time we only got to verse 8 tonight, but next time we will dig even further into it. Just realize that even though I gave you some of the interpretation tonight, if you want to read on down, you can. But I just thought it was so important as we were looking at it tonight to also give some interpretation. So with that, we love you. Remember, if there's anything that we can do for you, just let us know. Please like and share this. It will help in promoting this. I've gotten some feedback from some folks that have looked, and we just want to do everything we can to spread the word. So once again, we love you and good night.